When the devils crawl across the earth, screaming and infesting the land, the angels wake up. The divine remember who they are and that the darkness needs an answer, though not the answer they demanded, an answer that requires their silence. For devils cannot speak when they enter a world that doesn't belong to them, which is why they only know how to scream. The angels remind them that the world they infest was never theirs to scream inside. The angels remind them that they're only a disease, one that can be healed, though painful, a disease that erodes and becomes a tree, a life of oxygen stretching to the sun. And the angels dance under her shelter, the devils cured from the land. And together we breathe free, resting in our muscles, stroking our scars, feeling the heat of the sun. Reminded that we always could conquer the devils, though their screams left some scars. But the sun warms the scars and we breathe the air that was always ours. That is my When Angels Wake Up poem that I brought up in the last episode, because I couldn't help but think about the last episode. Often when you base an episode on a nightmare that leads to several deep thoughts, you kind of just keep circling it, which is the second half of that episode too, the circles. And today what I want to focus on is actually why I wrote that poem, the motivation for it, the inspiration for it, what it means to me. And it's funny, when I posted it, I got a very different reaction from several followers or people who visit my Facebook page that was not at all what the actual poem was about, but I'll get to that in a moment. Because I think I was a little bit paranoid after the last episode that some of what I shared about the Dakota beliefs and everything could give the impression that I wanted to engage in cultural appropriation, which of course I don't. And I hope it didn't come across that way. What I was suggesting, and what I'm going to continue to suggest in this episode, is what would happen if we honored some of the beliefs and cultural practices that existed in this land before it was colonized and that still do exist in this land. I think we're at a point in American history, which it's not our history, it's our time, but you get what I mean if you're looking at us on the grand scale of things. I think we're at a peak right now of some very toxic, corrupt systems. You can tell a lot about an organization by who leads it, right? Especially when you're in a place where leaders are elected. The leader sends a big message about what the followers are like, or what the followers value is maybe a more accurate way to describe it. And I'm just suggesting it might be time to examine and really honor the values that were meant to exist in this land, the first ones that were here. And on that note, I'm going to transition a little bit back to my poem, and then I will circle back to some of those values kind of at the end of the episode. But I want to talk about my When Angels Wake Up poem. First of all, I need you to know that I wrote that poem on the side of the road. I literally had to pull over after my dance class and type it up before I forgot. You might hear on other health podcasts or whatever it is that you listen to or read that movement can often inspire creativity. And I can tell you that's 100% true. A lot of my ideas for writing and things that inspire me in general come to me either while I'm dancing or walking or just moving. There's something that happens with the brain. So I highly encourage you to, listen to yourself while you're exercising or moving or whatever it is that you do. You'd be pretty amazed what you come up with when you tune in. And maybe on that note, I want to make sure to encourage you also to not let any of your thoughts go. That was one of the ways that I became a published author. Despite having 6 kids and a full-time job, I took my thoughts seriously. Think about how many thoughts you have during the day, conscious and unconscious, right? All the things racing through our brains. I started to just write those down. as well as my writing ideas before I forgot. If I had a moment, I would actually pause and write it just in a Google Doc on my phone. Then you know how Google Docs works, right? You can access it from anywhere that you log into your Google account. So I would put it on my phone in a Google Doc, and then later when I had some more time to actually develop it, I would open it on my computer. So I want to encourage you, whatever your passion is, whether you are also a writer or perhaps an entrepreneur or a med student or whatever it is, if you get an idea, if you get some inspiration, write it down before you forget. Because sometimes when it really hits you, when creativity or innovation really hits you, that moment doesn't come back. It's not quite as sweet as it was when it was in the thick of flow or when it was in the thick of your creative drive. So just make sure to record your thoughts as you have them, and you'd be surprised how those can compile up into quite a beautiful portrait. So with that, the purpose of this poem, I'm going to cover another story today, one of the heaviest ones that I think I have to share, along with hopefully a lesson for how to think about our greatest enemies, or maybe some of the most depressing times, as I think we are in a little bit right now, how some of those things can actually show us the best in ourselves. And so to explain more what I mean about that, let me talk about the poem. So what's funny about that poem is when I posted it, I had a ton of very devout Christians, posting things like, amen, yes, glory be to God. And, some of the really big devout folks just talking about, the second coming and all of that stuff. And what's funny is I wasn't actually referring to Christianity at all, although I can certainly understand where some of those impressions came as I referred to traditionally Christian figures such as the devil and angels. But that is not at all what I meant. And in that poem, I wasn't really talking about Christianity. However people want to interpret my writing, if it helps them and gives them hope, that's beautiful. So I'm not, I did not at the time tell any of those folks that that's not what it was really about, because if it took on its own meaning and special encouragement for them, that's what art is all about, right? So I let it be. But for our purposes, I am going to share what I meant. And for you to understand, I need to go into a little bit of a personal story. And that way I can kind of explain what I really meant by angels and devils and, devils taking over and the land being sick and the angels remembering who they are and sort of reclaiming what was rightfully theirs for the purposes of peace and caring for each other and the land around them. So at some point, there's layers to this story, and I'm trying to find the balance between telling you enough that you can understand my purposes today, but not so much that I get too deep in it. So I'm looking for that balance. But I mentioned in my first episode or two that I've had some experience with domestic abuse. And for today, I'm just going to talk about my experience with loving someone who was domestically abused. I'm going to keep it brief, until he's maybe ready to share that story. But I'm talking about my husband. When I met my husband, he was still in the thick of a 12-year-long abusive relationship with his ex-wife. And they were divorced when I met him, but they share children, and so she was very much still involved in his life. And he did not know he was being abused at the time. He didn't recognize it. As you know, if you've ever loved anyone who's been abused, or I hope, never been abused yourself, but if you have, you know what I mean. You get so used to a particular routine and being treated a certain way and thinking you deserve that treatment that you just don't even realize it's happening. And this particular abuser, I would classify as an actual narcissist. I think that term gets thrown around too easily these days, but I can tell you in the 36 years of my life, I have only ever met 3 what I would classify as actual clinical narcissists. Only 3. And so this person, his ex, is an actual narcissist and checks all of those boxes. And I'm not going to get into her story too much today because that's not what it's about, but it is part of what inspired my poem. Some of the things that she would do was often threaten my husband, and threaten him in multiple ways. Like, if you don't come pick up the kids now, you're not going to see them for a week. Or if you don't call me right now, I'm going to call your wife. She even counted down a couple times and said, respond, or I'm calling her. And she would screenshot my number, screenshot photos she had looked up of me. And she would count down and say 4, 3, 2, 1. And she would send those things separately, like literally number by number, unless he called her. She had threatened physical violence against him a couple times, showing up to parent-teacher conferences drunk, and she raised her fist to him unless he would let her take the kids home. And eventually she, just attacked him at our house, like full on tried to break into our home and punched him and kicked him and punched him, trying to like force her way through into our house. Now, these are just a couple of the incidents, but, and again, I don't really want to talk about it too much today. More of the story is for a later day, but the reason I'm bringing it up is because, for the longest time, my husband thought that if he would just kind of give her what it was that she wanted, whether that was a phone call or whether it was changing the custody schedule or whatever it might be, that she would stop with the threats. And, it wasn't just like a threat would happen every month or so. It was like maybe she would be quiet for a little while, but then all of a sudden he would have 30 messages on his phone, often like disparaging him as a father, swearing at him, all those things. And because he was kind of so used to just sort of satiating her, and because he wanted to keep his kids safe, and because he wanted to protect me from her behavior, he kept just kind of doing what he could to make her happy in the moment, so she wouldn't explode. And he knows this now, as do most of us, I think, or some of us, that abusers will never stop. Nothing you can do will make them stop, especially when they have a mental illness such as narcissism. And they won't ever stop what they're doing. I bring her also up because I do believe that our country is currently being led by a clinical narcissist. You can clearly see that in some of the delusional ideas that are happening right now. And narcissism in general has just become sort of like the sickness of America, in my opinion. Just this obsession, with image and destructiveness and profit at whatever cost. Give me what I want at whatever cost. Let's raise up a few, no matter what it does to the rest of the millions. But back to my individual story, it's all connected. When you love someone so much, and I do love my husband so much, and you have to watch them get abused, and you try to fight for him. I was fighting for him the whole time, right? I was trying to tell him what was happening was abuse, and eventually he heard and understood, but it takes time to break those cycles, right? It does something to you. You start to go crazy, and I'm talking about me. I became just as obsessed with her as she was with making our lives hell. And the reason is, when somebody threatens, your survival, and there was some very real trauma that happened because she brought physical violence to our home. When somebody threatens your survival, or you're always anticipating that they're going to attack in some way, and I mean verbal attacks and threats too, right? Because she was constantly verbally attacking and threatening him. Your brain kind of gets sort of addicted to the process of protection, right? Like you're always anticipating, what's going to happen next? What's she going to do next? What do I have to do next? What do I have to do to keep him safe? What do I have to do to keep my house safe? What do I have to do to keep her away? What do I have to do to expose her? Like, you just get kind of obsessed. You also get obsessed with the nerve, right? If you've ever known anyone abusive, or maybe just anybody arrogant, again, watch the news and you'll see it. You think, the nerve. How could they? How dare they? What in the world, are they thinking? How could they? You can go crazy with, not understanding, especially if you're not a violent or abusive person. You can drive yourself crazy thinking about just the nerve of people. And especially when that person is your husband's ex-wife, that's just extra ammunition, right? To feel just beside yourself with anger and frustration and just wanting the person to go away and wanting it to stop. And the thing that started to set me free, and it was something that I kind of learned through my own reflections on just various things that I would watch and read and listen to, is that the way to set yourself free from just the mind games of a narcissist, once you've physically separated yourself, because that's the most important thing, right? And this doesn't just apply to narcissists. This applies to just anybody who's kind of trying to take your identity away. The way to set yourself free is not to focus on the nerve that they have, but instead to focus on who you are and who you've become in the midst of the garbage that they brought you. And now let me explain. When I saw how his ex-wife was treating him and treating my stepdaughters, it was just really evil and really selfish, and it would drive me insane. And I started to think, I wanted to change her, right? I wanted her to stop, but I can't control her. But what I could control was me, and I could look at, well, who am I because of everything she's done? What kind of a family do I want? What kind of a life do I want? What kind of a world do I want? And I discovered that I am someone who not only can recognize monsters, like her and help people, get away from them, but I'm also somebody who wants to plant seeds of growth, seeds of life, seeds of peace. I've spent enough of my life fighting monsters. I don't want to anymore. I want peace. And throughout my struggle with dealing with the trauma that his ex-wife brought, trying to help my husband out of this abusive relationship, trying to protect my stepdaughters, I started to see myself as a bit of a healer, because I was able to bring life and love and protection where somebody else was bringing only darkness and abuse and selfishness. And she's done a lot of damage, don't get me wrong, but when I started to look at what I was building, because my husband and I are building a home of love and growth and beauty, I started to realize that what she did didn't matter so much anymore. And I'm not at the place yet where I'm ready to, I will never say thank you to her face, but you know how they say, like, when you get to a place where you in your mind can thank your worst enemy because of what you learned because of them. I'm getting there. And I learned, from her what I was able to make in the midst of some of the worst, most nightmarish behavior you can imagine. I was able to create a home, of love. I was able to dream. I published, several of my books while dealing with this bullshit. And it takes a lot of introspection. I had to think about, why am I getting so obsessive over her? Why am I obsessing about just wanting to make sure she screws up so bad that we never have to see her again? And it's like, well, I'm doing this because I want to live a life of peace. And because I couldn't control what she did, or, hoping she would just move on with her life, I had to focus on building the kind of life that I needed anyway. And so I just kept doing the things that brought love and peace into my life. And for me, what that meant was learning how to communicate more respectfully, with my husband, right? Like finding language by learning from her, like selfish, bad language. I was able to learn words that could communicate more like with love and inclusivity. Another thing that it meant for me was I have dreams of continuing to write and writing full time. It meant instead of obsessing and ranting over her behavior, maybe I could channel it into my writing instead. Maybe I could channel it into something that could create beauty and maybe inspire other people. I turned it into purpose, I have learned a lot about abusive relationships and steps for helping people get out of them because of her. And I was able to focus on the fact that, like, my husband is free now, at least mentally. You don't hear a whole lot of success stories of people getting out of abusive relationships. Now, I know they're out there and there's some amazing people, but you don't hear about them very often, right? A lot of you can probably think right now of a friend who you have who's stuck in one. I learned ways to help set people free from that kind of thing. I've learned how to create amazing beauty in the midst of some really dark evil. And I just did it anyway. I was never in the perfect, quiet, meditative state, but I would write anyway. Even if I was upset with her, even if I was fixating on her, I would still sit down and write my book, whether that was a poem or, I would focus on my writing, whether that was a poem where I channeled some of the bullshit that she did into something, or if it was a whole separate story, I would just sit down and do it. And now I'm on the other side of several published works. And I'm writing more and more and more. Another thing that it would mean is it's like, I would be really upset sometimes over the things that she would tell my stepdaughters, right? Lies. Just lies about some of the evil things that she was doing, or lies about themselves, or lies about us. I mean, narcissists lie, man. They will do and say anything to put themselves above others. It doesn't matter if it's true or not, or to justify what they are doing. And instead of focusing on constantly trying to debunk her lies, or maybe debunk isn't the right word, but you know what I mean. Instead of focusing on pushing the truth, with my stepdaughters when she would lie, I would live a life of truth. I live pretty openly and genuinely with my family. I don't really change my face where I go anymore. And, instead of, again, focusing on her inappropriate behavior, instead when I was around my stepdaughters, I would be open with them about, what I was thinking. And I wouldn't put a bunch of energy into making things up. One of Ed Milet's favorite quotes is, lessons are caught, not taught, right? And the best way that we can teach people is just by how we live ourselves. And it doesn't matter if it's your kids or adults that you're around. If you live your life authentically and in peace, you will spread that. So I'm finding myself having a hard time because I have a lot of big concepts and there's a lot of big feelings tied to this. And so I'm doing my best to articulate, this lesson to you. And some of it is maybe what you've heard before, but I can tell you that, I promise you that it works. And for me personally, I could go insane focusing on the direction of our country, right? And I'm not just talking about, the current president. I'm talking about like corporate greed in general, right? Like I think we can all clearly see that the United States has become a place where people are really focused on profiting at whatever cost, whether that's the health of people, with the cost of medications and doctor's visits or whatever it is, whether that's abusing the land that we live on, right? By taking everything the land has to offer without caring for it, without sustaining it, without putting anything back. We've become very much just a profit at whatever cost nation. Just like narcissists are profit at whatever cost people. They will take their victims for all they have and all they're worth if it creates the right image for them. And so the lesson I learned from my husband's ex-wife is one that I can now apply to what I would argue the sickness of this country is, which is the idea that it's okay to exploit and threaten and rise above people if it gets you the image that you're after. That's not right, right? That's not how human beings were meant to live. And that brings me back to this whole circle thing, right? Like the last episode, I was talking about how often, the Dakota teacher would meet in circles. They're certainly not the only people who've met in circles, but I love this idea, right, of sitting, alongside of and across from people. And you would be surprised how just the way you sit can create equality. And so I was using this shape of circles, but I also was just making the point of like, if we take just one small choice a day with the intention of noticing people more, caring more, empathizing more, it starts to change our culture. And my husband's ex-wife taught me that basically a lesson I think that we can all use to make our country better. It's really easy to look at the top right now, right? To look at the corrupt leadership and be sickened by it. But the best thing that you can do, the best thing that we can all do, is focus on ourselves and what we are doing to make the world better. If something sickens you within the slice of the world that you live in, do the opposite. If you also don't like the idea of one person rising above and taking people's rights, participate and live out of compassion. Live in a way that shows people that they are worth every human right that they absolutely are. Respect them. The way that we show people that they're worth their basic human rights is by listening to them, offering them equal opportunities, being open to learning from them. That's huge, right? And so it's my hope that, with the episode before and with this one, that we'll just take away perhaps the idea that it's worth not honoring, the indigenous people of this land one day out of the year. And please know, I know that no culture is perfect, but right, like every culture has its flaws and areas of growth. But what I'm saying is that I think it's worth it to not just learn about, the indigenous cultures and teachings one day a year on Indigenous Peoples Day or whatever it might be, but to actually really learn about them. How did the Dakota and Ojibwe people care for this land? What did they do? How did they sustain the places that we come from? And I say Dakota and Ojibwe people because those are the two primary indigenous groups where I'm from, but obviously there's a bunch of them. So wherever you live, you could do some research and learn, learn how did the people who were here first and who are still here care for this land? I mean, I even read in Michelle Obama's book, she was once one of the leaders of this country, and I would argue still is, as many people look up to her. She wrote in her The Light We Carry book about the three sisters, right? Those are like beans, corn, and squash. It's some of the vegetables that were first grown here. And she planted one of those gardens at the White House. And the whole idea of the three sisters, beans, corn, and squash, is that they both grow together in a sustainable way, but they also meet the nutritional requirements that humans need in beautiful ways. You can actually learn about them in the Blue Zones book, too, that Dan Buettner wrote. So my point is, I think we could just benefit a lot from honoring certain cultures instead of dismissing them. And I can't help but feel very strongly pulled to some of those lessons now at this peak time where certain things are falling apart. And as I'm nearing the end of this episode, I just want to tell you, again, the purpose of my poem, the purpose of everything I'm sharing with you here today is to tell you that you have so much healing and sustainable power if you look inward. And one of the greatest ways to heal from the evils of a narcissist is within. So in the midst of all the turmoil that our country is in right now, I want to encourage you strongly to look within. Look at what you can build. Because I promise you, those peaceful roots can spread. They have spread in my family, and they're going to continue to grow higher and higher. And please do. I keep forgetting this. I'm not really much of an entrepreneur. I'm just a very passionate person. Also, follow me. I'm going to be posting, episodes regularly, new ones every Tuesday, Friday. And of course, please visit my website. There's several free things for you to read there. lovingcreatively.com. And if you want to buy my books, you absolutely can too. Soon, I have the sequel to my novel Monsters. Novella Monsters. A novella is just a shorter novel. Monsters was about my experience with domestic abuse and surviving it, and She Death's Reflection is about surviving just the mental healing that comes from dealing with a narcissist, but in a very, very magical way. So I'll share more about that novella as it's set to come out in a week or two. I am so grateful for your time. Grateful for the energy that you put into listening, and I want to encourage you that everything that you hold internally matters, and we are powerful enough to grow roots of peace, to form new equal ways of doing things despite maybe some of the evils going on around us. So thank you again. Enjoy your day. You're wonderful.